Hello and welcome to Research Matters podcast. I'm your host Spoorthy Raman, and in today's episode of Joy of Science, I have with me Professor Anindita Bhadra from the Indian Institute of Science Education and Research, Kolkata. Professor Bhadra is the principal investigator of the Dog Lab at IISER Kolkata, which comes under the Department of Biological Sciences. An interesting name to have, Dog Lab. For over a decade, Professor Bhadra and her students are studying free-ranging dogs or street dogs as we know them in India. Well, let us know a little more about what their life is as researchers studying these furry friends of ours and how they do it. Professor Bhadra, thank you so much for joining and welcome to this episode of Joy of Science. So, to start with, you're probably India's first research scientist who is studying free-ranging dogs from an ecological, cognitive, and behavioral perspective. And dogs have been, a subject of many controversies in the past, present, and probably the future. So, why dogs?
Because when I finished my PhD and I was considering, what to do after this, I was continuing to work with Professor Gadekar as a postdoc, and I was kind of thinking of what do I want to do in the future. I kind of decided I don't want to go abroad to do a postdoc because I had a little baby, and I was quite sure that I don't want to do the same kind of work on social insects living in India, because as I told Professor Gadekar very clearly that, I admire you so much, but I don't want to be just known as your student, because I would like to work on wasps if I have to, but I couldn't do anything that is too different from what you've done, maybe a different model system, but similar work. And then I'll just be an extension of your lab, but I don't want that. I want my own identity. And that's when I was looking for interesting model systems. And I must say here, I have always said this about my supervisor. I was so lucky to be working with him. Most supervisors, not just in India but also abroad, would have hated their students after that statement, but my supervisor was actually appreciative, and he said, you are giving me real academic fitness because you're doing something different. So I was interested in crows and dogs because I always found these two very fascinating creatures, because especially the way they have adapted to living around humans. And I was kind of vacillating between the two, and then I was thinking, okay, which would be easier to work with, because given that you'll need students, many students might not want to go grab crows and tag them. So I kind of migrated towards dogs. That was one of the reasons. The second being that I was reading a lot of literature and I saw that nobody is really working on free-ranging dogs. And the more I read the literature on pets, I realized that people are asking some questions about how dogs became dogs, the evolution, the dog-human coevolution, their adaptation to humans. And they were doing this by using pets, which were being reared and bred and brought up within human homes. And then they are saying, okay, dogs are capable of understanding human gestures, but how do you know it's not because of their upbringing? And I said, oh my God, we have this perfect model system which nobody has studied to address all of these questions. So I kind of decided, okay, I want to do this.
That's an interesting story behind your motivation to study dogs. So I think you mentioned something interesting, saying that co-evolution of humans and dogs that goes to thousands of years, tens of thousands of years ago, and science has shown that it's at least 10,000 years ago. And we've literally lived with, growing up together. Most of our evolution history, even as humans, has been with dogs, considering these numbers. So when you say free-ranging dogs, what are specific characteristics that you find with them compared to dogs that we have known as pet dogs? Like, how do you differentiate between the two scientifically?
So technically, free-ranging dogs are those which don't have owners. So any dog out there on the street, even if it was a pet and is no longer under ownership, could be a free-ranging dog. But actually, if you look at the literature, earlier literature on free-ranging dogs, so most of these dogs that people have studied, there are some studies from Italy, so some studies from the US, these are all either runaway dogs or abandoned dogs which have then hung around in some parts, and those have been studied as free-ranging. But we actually have a good free-ranging population in the sense that they've been living like this for centuries. So several generations in which they have been in the current condition. So technically, any dog which is not under human supervision is free-ranging.
Okay.
But then I think this population is, as a population, it's free-ranging because of the biology of it.
Okay, that's interesting. So, yes, dogs, and a lot of people are now taking up to having dogs at home. There's a lot of fancy about this, and but when you study these dogs, are you like literally living a dog's life? Is it so hard to study them? How is it to study? How are your field visits?
Yes and no.
Okay.
So why is it hard? I'll tell you. The students who come to work with me, mostly I get applications saying, I love dogs, I've always loved dogs, I have 2 dogs at home and I want to study them. I have to really make them go through a lot of rigorous training so that they don't go and cuddle their dogs and feed their dogs and take them to the vet, because then you're adding all your bias, right? So you have to learn to detach yourself from the model system and become an observer, which takes a lot of effort. And so that way it's slightly difficult. No, because all my students are here because they love the work. So the work per se is tedious. People have to walk on roads and do observations sitting out there in the sun and rain. So I have a student who was all decked up on Diwali and doing observations on the street. So all of this is, they take it in their stride and it's part of the job and they enjoy it. So that way it's not difficult. But another difficulty that we always face actually comes from the people around us, because I've had students being threatened to be taken to the police because they were spotted with video cameras giving some food to dogs, and people in the neighborhood thought, these are robbers who are, coming and bribing our dogs and taking videos of the neighborhood, and then they are going to come back in the night to rob us. I've had students being threatened by the public because she was doing a video of dogs mating, and she was really threatened because they thought she was trying to do dog pornography. And people call my students mad. People chase them out of neighborhoods saying, you cannot feed dogs here, or these are my dogs. I feed them and nobody else gets to feed them. So all kinds of issues. And of course, then there are a lot of people who hate dogs. I have had people telling me that because we are working on dogs, we are increasing the dog population. Very difficult for me to understand how we can do that by just observing them. But yeah, so we get a lot of threats. Another problem is when some student is doing an experiment and something is being video recorded, people come and say, you must be from a news channel. Which news channel? Take my interview. Or they want to be ultra helpful. They will try to drag a dog to the food and of course ruin the experiment completely. Or they'll try to chase away their dog. So all of these nice people, helpful people, and the nasty people are a big problem for us.
When you spoke about people being, what they are when you're doing your experiments, people have different views about dogs. There are some people, as you mentioned, really like them. Some totally hate them. Even in your field of research, that is ecology, there are different views of dogs. Some people think that they are biodiversity's enemy because they forage on rare and endangered species. They're going to hunt them down and lead to depletion of those species. And there are some views saying that okay, dogs are supposed to be scavengers, they're supposed to help control rodent population and things like that. So what is your view of an ecological importance of dog? Are they really enemies as we tend to think about it?
See, the way I see it is, it's us humans who are in their space. and not vice versa. My work very clearly shows that the dogs are there where the humans have been or the humans are. Even in the campus, we were in this agricultural university, BCKV campus, and we have clear data which shows that in the pockets where there are people, there are dogs, and then there are vast expanses of fields where there are no dogs. So they just follow people because they are scavengers. They go there for the food, also sometimes for shelter, and sometimes for the attention that they get. Now the problem that we face with dogs attacking rare animals is we have to understand that we are constantly infringing upon the forests. Why are the rare animals so close to human habitation? They're not supposed to be, right? The villages and the towns are expanding, right, and there is less and less space which is secluded for the really wild animals, and this is why the dogs are coming very close to the wild animals, and this is leading to conflict. Dogs by nature are scavengers, but then they also have a hunting evolutionary past, and what we see is when they do not find enough resources by scavenging, then there are times when they will form a pack and actually hunt. Here we have seen dogs who were chasing a goat, and the goat got killed, and then the dogs didn't eat it. They didn't even know what to do with it when the goat was dead. They just stood there. So it's not that they will by choice hunt, but of course, given scarcity of food, they do hunt. We know there is enough evidence for that. And of course, it is important to understand how much of a threat they are to the ecology in certain habitats. But we also have to understand that it is our responsibility because we are the ones who have taken them there in the first place. So dogs are very urban, they are very well adapted to the urban scenario, and they only migrate out of this human dominated habitat because of humans migrating. So there are studies, for example, Vanak's group is doing studies. They have done some work in Spiti which shows how the dogs are becoming a menace now because of the tourist influx. So the human factor is something which is typically ignored in studies when we are looking at dog wildlife conflict, but we cannot. It has to be a three-way interaction. So you cannot look at the dogs in isolation from the humans. True. So this is my perspective of it. Mm-hmm. See, I get, as I told you, the dog lovers hate me because I'm not giving a strong statement for the dogs, and the dog haters hate me because I work on dogs. But I try to be as neutral as possible because I think as a scientist, if I take sides, then my bias will influence my research, which it should not be. So I try to be as unbiased as possible, and all the comments that I make are based on not my love for dogs. I love dogs, but I don't base my conclusions on my love for dogs, but on data.
Mm-hmm. Totally. So I think that's an interesting thing that you pointed out, saying one, your views shouldn't be biased as a scientist because then that is going to obviously influence the science you're doing. And when it comes to studying dogs, we need to study dogs as dogs and not as pets, because the moment you start looking them as pets, then you will obviously, as you mentioned again before, saying that okay, upbringing is going to be changing, and then the interactions are going to be very close that they wouldn't have had in the past, and that's basically taking a toll on how we understand dogs. And interestingly, in most of the Western world, the domestication in that sense of dogs have increased, and many dogs have become pets. And for the lack of free-ranging dogs that have evolved by themselves, people tend to start doing all these studies on their pet dogs. There's obviously going to be a different kind of environment to compare to a free-ranging dog, but most of them have been studies on pet dogs. So what is the contribution of your research to science in that sense, when most of the studies haven't been on free-ranging dogs?
So as I said, when I was initially looking up the literature, I was very surprised that people were trying to understand the so-called socio-cognitive abilities, the abilities of dogs to understand and communicate with humans, using pets which have been trained and raised and bred by humans. So they are in the human environment and they are trained from day one to respond to certain human cues. So, how do you know what is innate and what is learned during the process of development? It's very difficult to tease these two apart. So, what people have done is they have looked at semi captive wolves to do a comparison, but still, these are not dogs. And the wolves are also not wild. So, you have two unnatural situations which you are comparing to understand what actually happened in nature. So I think the way we contributed is by giving a natural system in which we did some things which nobody has done in terms of the behavioral ecology. We looked at parental care, we looked at the population, growth and the mortality and stuff like that. Of course, which they couldn't do, but we also repeated experiments on social cognition. For example, are dogs able to follow human gestures, simple gestures as pointing? What is the response in juveniles versus adults? So how innate is this? So questions like this, we used similar protocols as people have done with pet dogs and wolves, and we did comparative studies with free ranging dogs, and our results kind of changed the way people were looking at dogs because they were so different from the pet dogs. So there's Monique Goodell in Oregon State University. She actually wanted to do a collaboration in which her student would work on pet dogs and shelter dogs, and my student would work on the free ranging dogs, and then we wrote papers together. And there we bring out the differences, and every time we do these experiments, the free ranging dogs do something completely unexpected, something people have never seen in pet dogs, but to us they look like, yeah, this is what we expected anyway, because we have been seeing these dogs for so many years, right? So that is, I think, the contribution that whenever somebody asks me, what do you think is your best piece of work? I always say, I don't think it's a best piece of work which can be, found in one paper. But now, some of the people who were always working with pet dogs have started going to countries where there are free-ranging populations. There's one lab working in Morocco, one lab working in Bali. So more and more people are realizing that you need to look at free-ranging populations to understand what comes naturally to dogs and what they learn through interactions with humans. And I think this is the thing that we have contributed to the literature or to the field where people realize the importance of free-ranging populations.
When you talked about people, I have another follow-up question with you. People, when you say when there's a touchy subject like dogs, especially in cities, there is a view saying that okay, dogs are dangerous, and unfortunately, there have been incidents to kind of back it up. There have been dogs that have mauled small vulnerable children. There are obviously a lot of cases of stray dog biting people, and India is supposed to be the capital of rabies because a lot of dogs carry rabies, things like that. So when we start to realize and understand the value that studies like this are bringing, do you think there is a possibility that this can alleviate some of human dog conflicts? And if so, how is it that we can better understand our dogs so that each of us do not really bother one another and learn to co-live in such a environment?
Frankly, I don't think most people care about the science of it. So just because scientifically this is an important population, I don't think people will stop being anti-dog. Even, often I get phone calls from people in various institutions across the country where there's a pro-dog, anti-dog war going on, and the dog-friendly people call me and say, can you tell me what we could do to stop this? See, my reading of the situation is when I talk to more and more people, there is this general feeling that India could become more developed if we did not have dogs on streets, because America doesn't have dogs on streets. This is a very standard thing that I have heard n number of people, educated people, scientists even say this. Oh, I was in Harvard, I was in Cambridge, and they don't have dogs on streets and they don't have dogs on campus. Why should we have dogs on campus? So this is one thing, a very Western view of looking at this whole thing. And I always say, okay, I'll give you the other end of it, that I always say, the oldest dog in literature you can think about as a free-ranging dog is the dog which followed the Pandavas up in the Himalayas. So it's a stray dog. So they've been there for thousands of years, and we have coexisted. They have gotten used to our rapid urbanization. They've gotten used to cars and bikes and all of the torture that we have put them through, and they've survived. So they belong here, right? So you basically want them to be removed because you think they are an eyesore. Why? Because they bark. Humans play loud music and torture animals. They burst crackers and kill animals. They pollute the environment, pollute the water. They are destroying the environment. Only point is these animals cannot gang up together and say, let's kill all the humans, right? This is the way I would see it. Second, there's this huge growth in the number of people who say, oh, poor dogs, they have to live on streets. If I could just take all of them home. Excuse me. They have lives, they have their social organization, they have their families, they have their dynamics, they have their love-hate relationships. They need to bark at each other, they need to kill each other, bite each other, fight with each other, whatever. That is the way the population sustains itself. So please let them be. Don't kill them, don't cuddle them, don't overfeed them, just let them be. I think both the ultra dog lovers and the ultra dog haters are the ones who are dangerous to the population. Frankly, I know I'm going to get a lot of hate mail because of that one statement, but I think this is true. And I think there's a normal distribution from my perception of talking to people, and thankfully the broadest part of the distribution is covered by the typically neutral people who are like, yeah, they're there. As long as they don't come and, dirty my courtyard, I'll let them be. Even, there are puppies, I'll give some extra food to the mother. These are the people who help them survive. Just being not interfering with the dogs, either too positively or too negatively. You have to understand, if you take a dog in as a pet, it becomes your pet. It doesn't remain in the population anymore. But if there's a dog population out there and you are pampering 3 of them, you are influencing the population in some way which we don't understand, right? Just today my student was saying that there are some dogs on campus who kind of get evaded by the others. And these are the dogs who are typically cuddled by the students and they're around the hostel. So socially, I don't even know what we are doing to these dogs if they are being evaded by their peers, right?
Yes.
So we don't know whether being ultra polite, ultra nice to them and ultra loving to them, we are actually influencing their lives in a negative way. I have seen this. There was a neighboring family. They took in this mother with her litter, and this lady would actually feed each of the puppies individually. She would stand guard, not let the pups fight over the food. Eventually, when these pups grew up, they did not know how to mate, they did not know how to fight, they refused to go out when other dogs were there. They did not have any pups in the first mating season. They were completely lost. And of course, the female was in heat, and the entire group was a mess. Because they've never fought, they've not been allowed to fight, they've been fed out of bowls, and segregated moment they were getting into a fight. Fighting is necessary. That's an important part of their development. And when they grew up, they didn't know how to fight. One of them got killed because a pack of dogs attacked and it didn't know what to do.
Oh my God.
So we were basically hampering their survival in the long run.
Right.
So, too much affection might be dangerous. So, yeah, when it comes to people, I always say try and be as neutral as you can. But, yeah.
Yeah, so the take home point is that don't do anything, let them be, and they'll be the best. The moment we start interfering in any which way, we are influencing them, their social structure in ways we don't understand at the moment. There's no science to back it up, and then we probably end up with worse results.
So I'll actually add to that. You said something during your last question that there are incidents of dog bites and dogs mauling children, which are of course extremely upsetting. But again, if I take a completely neutral and unemotional stance, do you know how many dogs are killed by humans every year? So we have data which shows that in a population, whatever pups are born in one season, only 19% of them survive up to adulthood. And of the 81% of the dogs that are killed, 62% die because of some human induced cause. It could be an accident, it could be because they were beaten up so badly that they died eventually. And there are poisonings. People come, feed dogs poisoned food, and kill the whole group.
Yes.
So we are the biggest killers of puppies.
True.
Right?
True.
So if you look at it just from the perspective of two populations of two species interacting, then we probably do more harm to them than they do to us.
Right.
But of course, we are selfish, being humans. We always want to look at it from our perspective.
True, absolutely. And then it gets highlighted in all the different, news channels, media, showing it over and over again and portraying that as something that's, worse than probably climate change, which probably isn't. So, yeah, interesting. And I hope this is kind of going to be a eye-opener to many of our listeners in the sense that, well, dogs are here, we are here, and we need to find a way where we don't interfere with each other. And the more we are away from each other, the better for both of us. So going back, you obviously brought up a lot of interesting insights into your research. Just give us a snapshot of how your typical day of field visit is in terms of what instruments you use, what are the apparatus you use, how expensive or how inexpensive it is to do research on a system like dogs.
Many of our field apparatus, sometimes for some experiments and observations, are just observation sheets, a clipboard, and a pen. And then there are some experiments for which you need to record the whole thing in video and then do a playback. So cameras, simple cameras, and nowadays students just say, no, I don't want to use the camera, my cell phone is much better. So that's it. And in the lab you need a computer, and the only thing which we keep buying are hard disks to store all the video.
Sure.
So yeah, and sometimes we use GPS devices, but that also students say nowadays, no ma'am, my phone is okay, I don't need the GPS anymore.
Right.
So and we use R now for statistical analysis.
Okay.
So yeah, inexpensive research.
Wow. So is there a chance that research like this, where obviously everybody in this country pretty much has access to some population of free-ranging dogs, is there something that people can do with just observations and probably help in the bigger scope of research here?
So I've been trying to get some people interested in a citizen science project, because it's fantastic if we can collect, a national level data on something as simple as when are the births happening, to understand if there is a very stark seasonality and how it varies across because one of the pieces of work that we have done very clearly shows that there is a very strong correlation, at least in Bengal, with the rains and mating. Whether this holds true across the country, what happens in Rajasthan when it doesn't rain half the time? Do dogs not breed? So that would be something very interesting, and anybody can do it. All you need to do is, you have a document, an Excel sheet or a Google Doc, where you simply put in every time you see a new pup being born, you just document the location and the date and the details of how many pups were born and stuff like that. So that could give big data set which we could use for a lot of work in the future, and understanding also of how the population fluctuates over years, and whether the numbers that we've been reporting from some regions holds true for the national region, and that would also be a good baseline data for understanding the rabies load eventually, because there is no nationwide study.
Okay. So is there something that is in the pipeline for you to open this up? Are you working on something on this?
So I've spoken to the people who do the Cube. There's this kind of platform which is under the Tata Institute of Social Science. They have the Homi Bhabha Center. So I kind of spoke to them, but this is still kind of something which hasn't taken off.
Okay.
Because it's not easy to find a network of volunteers.
Right.
So yes, that's something we would definitely like to do.
Wow.
So.
That's interesting. And when you obviously have a good body of science, what are your expectations on how that science relate to us? And are there any lessons we can learn from a dog's life?
I think they are extremely good at adapting to change, because we've seen that people move out and the resources change. They'll migrate in, out. When the groups become too big and the people are getting disturbed, eventually the group will split. um, they are extremely territorial, but they typically do their territorial fights after people have gone to bed, because I think they learn that when they're fighting on the streets, when there are too many people around, they get beaten up, they get water thrown over them. But they also, they come from a nocturnal past, but they are quite active during the day because that's when they get all the food. So, they're very flexible. So, most of the work that we are doing keeps showing us how flexible they are in everything, all kinds of behaviors. There's one key word about them is flexibility.
Okay.
And that's something which is a very nice lesson, how you adapt to change
So
very quickly.
This is with respect to only free ranging dogs that we're talking about, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Interesting. So flexible dog lives, and that's probably what has kind of helped them being here survive for so long. Yes, definitely. And in hostile environments too, where there are really unfortunate events happening and accompanying their lives. So yeah, flexibility is definitely one thing. You have been an animal behavior researcher for quite a long time now, and of course, with so much of traction that this field of research is getting, there are obviously budding enthusiasts who are listening in or maybe wanting to do more animal behavior studies. So, what is your small messages for them? How toiling is this field of study, and what is it that they can look forward to in this?
My first recommendation is, if you hate hard work, don't come to this field. We always have to work with live animals. So there will be failures. There will be days when you go and you don't find your model system. There will be days when your animal goes to sleep in the middle of the experiment. You have to be adjustable to their moods, to the, also to the mercies of the seasons, because I might plan something and it rains so badly I cannot do it. So all fellowships come with a time. It has to be done within this time. But sometimes people make ambitious plans and they cannot finish on time. So this is something that we have to accept, that the time taken for this kind of research is typically longer than an experiment where the time is completely in your control. You're switching on and switching off a machine. So you have to devote time, you have to devote energy, you have to be out there in the field and brave the weather. For research of my kind, where you're actually out on city streets with a lot of people around, you have to be prepared for a lot of interactions with random people, both positive and negative, and it's going to be tedious. But at the end of the day, it's going to be extremely fulfilling when you see patterns emerging out of nothing. Firstly, there have been students who've told me, what am I doing? I'm like, close your eyes and write down stuff. Don't try to find patterns while you're doing your observations. Patterns will emerge when you analyze the data, because then you're not going to be biased by what you think you're observing. And when these come out and when you repeat your experiments and the patterns hold true, the pleasure you get out of it, it's almost like you've solved a very difficult jigsaw puzzle. And the most beautiful thing is, once you've done that, then there's a fresh question waiting for you to be answered.
Right.
And this just goes on. It's like a quest. So if you want to take up that challenge, definitely come. If you hate animals, definitely don't come. And if you hate hard work, this is not the place for you.
Yes, I think that's a very important message to drive home, because a lot of things get initially, people started off and then there are few moments of despair. Of course, when you talk about academic research, there are a lot of things that do not work in your favor, and this is a good piece of advice, surely. Thank you. So, Professor Bhadra, thank you so much for sharing with us an insight into your, research and the joy behind the science that you do. I hope the story inspires some of us to look at dogs a little differently than what we are used to and told, and get an insight into how animal behavior studies can actually be mesmerizing. So, thank you so much.
Thank you, Spoorthy.
Thank you for listening. This podcast was brought to you by Research Matters, a SciComm initiative by Google Labs. For more such science-based stories and podcasts, log on to www.researchmatters.in. Until next time, stay tuned.